Morning, everybody. Oh boy, what a morning it has been here in sunny Southern California. In some parts of where I'm at, well, let me just say this. Where I am here in Signal Hill, it is 86 degrees, which means most people around me are probably dealing with 100-degree temperatures. It's an appropriate day to be this hot, especially considering what we're going to talk about. And folks, it is unbelievable. By the way, just information, David Tall is not with us today. He is on an airplane, actually, so he can't do a live show from an airplane. But folks, I'm going to tell you something. If there's ever been a day for me to just talk, today is that day. Because what we watched happen yesterday is absolutely precedent-setting, okay? I said precedent-setting. It's precedent-setting. What we have witnessed is unbelievable, and the Trump administration may have just changed the course of where the nations are moving in the modern day. So we need to talk about it because it has deeply prophetic implications, the likes of which may be unprecedented because of what it may end up doing. Again, we do not take Bible prophecy and seek to sew it in to every headline and say, this is it, that's not it. What we're supposed to do is we're supposed to look at everything, the totality of everything, and actually view it through the lens of what the Bible shows us. And this is one of those situations where there's no far-reaching. I don't have to go grab at anything. I don't have to make up something, put something together. Not that I do that. As a matter of fact, I go to great lengths to make sure I don't do that. But what we are watching here is absolutely remarkable. I'm telling you, it's outstanding. It's absolutely outstanding because the value that it has in being able to understand a little deeper what's going on is very clear. Okay? So let's talk about what happened yesterday. What happened yesterday is something that I do not believe most people fully understand yet. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to discredit the intelligence of individuals. I'm just saying most people do not fully understand this. I know this for a fact. Even by watching commentary online, it's become painfully obvious that most people don't understand the significance of what we saw happen. When people hear the word sanctions, what they tend to do is they tend to just completely tune out. It's a word that is, for lack of a better term, it's repelling. It's extremely repelling. Iran has been sanctioned for decades. We know that. This is not anything new. So when we hear the term, we really don't do anything with it because it's much of the same. No big deal. We've heard about maximum pressure for a long time. We've heard about the freezing of assets. This is something that is constantly being discussed. We know all about what these sanctions mean in their normal state. We've even talked about sanctions against the IRGC, what it means, what's happening through the existing sanctions that are being done not only by the United States of America, but by the rest of the international world. But this is different. What happened yesterday is different in scope. The Secretary of the Treasury Department, Scott Bessent, announced something that he called Operation Economic Outcast. And I want you to listen carefully to the stated objective. His objective is clear. There is no ambiguity in his objective. He says, our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. Let me read that one more time. It's an exact quote. Let me read it one more time. Our objective is to sever every economic lifeline that sustains this tyrannical regime until Tehran stands alone. This is not simply an announcement that is being aimed at Iran. That's where this becomes really interesting. It's an announcement that is aimed at everybody that's doing business with Iran. I recorded, by the way, a video about this subject that gets released on Friday, I believe it is. It's either Friday or Saturday. I think Saturday. It digs into this at a level like this. This is unbelievable. It's unbelievable what this means. Bessent actually said that the administration is engaging governments around the world. Yes, governments around the world. He put up a massive ultimatum. He said every country involved in any Iran-related activity identified by the United States is supposed to receive a defined timeline to shut that activity down. So in other words, if you're a country that does any kind of transacting with Iran, you are about to get a notice from us. You're about to get a letter. And the letter is going to very clearly show you the obligation, the expectation that you disengage. His warning is very simple. If they don't act, then the United States Treasury will act. That's why I've entitled today's broadcast, "The World Was Just Put on Notice," because that's exactly what happened. Now, this is critical, and I want everybody to see this. So let's talk about this. We have to break this down so that you can fully understand what's going on. Let's ask the most obvious questions. First and foremost, what actually happened? This is important. You have to be able to understand what took place within this immediate context. If you don't understand what happened, you're going to have a bigger problem. And it is significant. It is something that is very much worth having a conversation about. Operation Economic Outcast expands potential secondary sanctions literally across 5 major sectors of the Iranian economy. And by the way, there's a promise that they will likely expand even more. That's huge. Huge. Let's talk about the areas that the Treasury Department is targeting. I mean, if you really think about it, this is the Trump administration that we're talking about here. It's just being done through Treasury. It's remarkable. They will be targeting digital assets. They will be targeting technology, which, by the way, can I just simply say, digital assets and technology alone bring to us a significant issue. They're going to be targeting gold. They're going to be targeting aviation. They're going to be targeting shipping. Treasury also, listen to this, they also sanctioned nearly 60 entities. That number actually may be bigger now. I have to go back and do the checking. 60 entities or individuals or vessels across multiple jurisdictions that are connected to Iran's nuclear and missile procurement. Think about that. They're also coming against those who have helped with cyber operations and any type of oil revenue networks. They've all been targeted, every single one of them. Now, there's an important distinction that I need to make because the distinction helps us to be able to understand how clear this issue is. It's simple. If you choose to do any kind of assistance with Iran, America will not do business with you. The secondary sanction, and this is very, very important, is that you are not necessarily American, but if you continue doing certain business with Iran, America may punish you. In other words, you will be on the hit list. That is where I think this becomes extraordinarily powerful. I think it becomes extraordinarily powerful because if the United States of America is willing to use the big stick that it is threatening people with, then things will change. It's the ultimate mess around and find out. Bessent explicitly warned that anyone continuing to enable Iranian economic activity could literally expose themselves to the American financial system. Meaning, you will lose your primary source of leverage to be able to maneuver within the context of most markets. Bessent explicitly warned that anyone continuing to enable Iranian economic activity will literally expose themselves to the American financial system. That is major. I can't say that enough. I cannot say that enough. What he announced yesterday was he basically said the clock has just started ticking, so y'all better pay attention. It is coming down, and it's coming down hard, and it is indeed coming down fast. Treasury's language here. I want to make myself clear. Speaking of making myself clear, Treasury's language makes it clear that any entity facilitating any type of evasion of sanctions imposed upon Iran or money laundering can risk being cut off from the U.S. financial system all the way through. No exceptions. The most simple way to explain this is by saying you may have a sovereign right to do business with Iran, and we're not going to get in the way of your sovereign right to do business with Iran. Go ahead. But America also has the sovereign right to decide whether you still get access to their financial system. That's real leverage. Folks, that's the kind of leverage that we have not seen used historically in an extraordinarily long time. And certainly we've never seen it used at this level. Maybe somebody in the chat can correct me, but I don't know if we've ever seen it at this level. I just don't know. And it's very, very interesting. Now, there are some people that say this may be the beginning of the dollar toppling, and that may very well be true. Especially if people don't want to play in the sandbox. I kind of have a feeling that the stronger the dollar gets, the more in danger we become of going cashless. I don't think it goes the other way. And I can explain that on a completely different show. And it goes to speak, by the way, I learned that, or I developed that conviction the last time we had several banks go insolvent a couple of years ago. I really developed, I think, a very a more specific awareness of how the dollar actually affects things and why I think it would be necessary for the dollar to become stronger before we went cashless than it become weaker. If it went weaker, well, I don't want to get on that tangent. I just don't want to do it because I could end up making all kinds of we would lose the topic of the show. I'm not going to do that. So, why is it that being cut off from the dollar is such a big deal? Maybe I should just talk about that for a second since we're talking about the dollar. It's probably not a bad idea. People hear dollar system and they think that this simply means somebody can't hold American dollars. That's typically how people look at this. I would say the average person views it that way. But that's not true. Okay, it's much bigger than that. Okay, let's talk about international banks for a second because this will help you understand the system and get, you know what? Now you're making me, all of you guys are making me go on a tangent. Sorry. Now I have to do that. Now I have to do this. I have to qualify this statement. So let's just talk about the dollar for a second. I know but I promise you, I will get back to this issue. As a matter of fact, I know I can take it back to this issue because it has everything to do with this issue. International banks regularly depend on what we call correspondent banking relationships with American banks to clear what we would call dollar-denominated transactions. Okay? Let me explain what I mean when I say that. A foreign bank may not have a physical branch in New York. Okay? But if it conducts international dollar business, somewhere in that chain, it often depends upon access to the American financial system. This is why American secondary sanctions have historically been so effective. I want people to understand this. Treasury did this in 2012. Okay, not even close to this scope. But this was something that got very clearly explained. Foreign banks depend upon relationships with the United States, and I almost went down the 2012 road. I'm not gonna let myself get distracted, so I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go back to my train of thought here. Let's go back to foreign banks for a second. They depend upon relationships with banks in the United States. Not banks in the United States, United States banks. Oftentimes the same thing, but in some cases not. Now, they depend upon relationships with United States banks because those relationships allow them to provide dollar-denominated services to their customers. Now, that's critically important. Because you might be a bank in a foreign country, and a lot of people who rely upon the U.S. dollar will not do any business with that bank if it related to foreign currency. They oftentimes think in terms of the U.S. dollar. You cut that access off, and the bank's ability to operate internationally can become dramatically constrained on a whole bunch of levels. Here's the reality of it, guys. America doesn't have to shut down your bank. It's not even close to necessary. It can make your bank much harder for the rest of the world to use, and that's where the real weapon is. You understand what I mean when I say that? This is such a big deal that we cannot lose sight of. So let's talk about this. I mentioned 2012. Has America done this before? Yes, it has. Never at this scope. I need to be accurate with you. I need to give you a picture so that you can understand the scope of what we're dealing with right now. There is precedent for secondary sanctions. And ironically, believe it or not, one of the clearest precedents is Iran. I mentioned this. 2010, 2011, 2012, I think it's sometime around there, the United States in sleep deprivation put into act the CISADA. And for those of you that don't know exactly what that is, within the context of that, Treasury itself said that the law that was imposed, put into motion, set a new precedent because it gave Washington the power to require U.S. banks to terminate correspondence banking relationships with foreign banks. That's a big deal. They didn't have that power before. Now, again, the rule was very clearly defined. The United States had the power to do that in a very specific context, and that context was conducting significant transactions with sanctioned Iranian banks. They had to be sanctioned. We hit the fast forward button, which I think is 2012. You guys will have to fact check me on this. I didn't put it in my notes, but that's because I'm chasing a rabbit trail right now. But in 2012, the pressure that we just talked about in 2010, that expanded to foreign financial institutions that were conducting significant transactions with Iran's central bank. So it was no longer a regulation on American banks doing business with Iranian banks. It now became foreign banks doing business with Iranian banks. Treasury officials at that time traveled around the world explaining the consequence. This was, by the way, this was done at the hand of the Obama administration. At one point, which, by the way, their failure to execute enforcement on this is what backfired so bad and is what's, in essence, is what gave us the validity that was tied to the JCPOA. At one point, they had spoken with governments in literally 50 countries. This is the Obama administration Treasury Department, okay? And they spoke to representatives of hundreds of banking institutions that were foreign. I'm not kidding you. And by the way, it worked. Their execution was not so great, but the promise scared people enough. Most banks decided that Iran was not worth losing access to the United States, so they complied. So in 2012, the United States of America actually did sanction some banks. They sanctioned one of the banks that are in China. They sanctioned one of the banks that was in Iraq. I believe it was the Elaf Islamic Bank, if I remember correctly. Maybe you guys can, maybe my moderators can fact check that for me. I'm almost certain it was the Elaf Islamic Bank. And this is in Iraq. The United States barred both of these banks from having direct access to American financial systems. And their whole stated purpose for doing it is facilitating Iranian transactions. Now, in my opinion, I don't think that was very effective in the sense that, yes, it worked, but then when we go and we give Iran a whole bunch of cash, what's the point, right? I mean, anyway. Then we're gonna start getting into the Arab Spring, and we're gonna start talking about the effect on Libya and what happened in Syria, and there's so much we could talk about. The Obama administration jacked up the Middle East on so many levels, it's not even funny. So, Treasury, later on, as I said before, removed those sanctions after that bank chose to freeze their transactions, really more the accounts. They froze Iranian accounts. And that, in essence, significantly reduced their exposure to Iran, and as a result, they were rewarded by the sanctions being lifted. Funny thing is, while those sanctions were being lifted, Obama gave a whole 747 full of cash to the IRGC. That's a whole other story. Stupid. Anyway, I'm going to chase a rabbit trail. I don't want to. But this is how the weapon works. The threat itself, because of how consequential it is oftentimes enough to put into effect the result. So what is different now? What about this is so different? Okay. Clearly the weapon is not new. The way Washington is now proposing to deploy it is what is completely precedent-setting. Bessent isn't merely targeting several banks in Iran. He described what he called, and this is his quote. I wrote the quote down. It's crazy. He described what he said was an economic onslaught against Iran's financial connections. And he didn't just say their financial connections, period. He said their financial connections around the globe. His actual quote is, "It is no longer acceptable to operate in the gray spaces of this conflict." Then he describes, and this is where it gets interesting. Follow me with this, guys. Then he describes exactly what foreign countries have been allowing. And by the way, there's gold in this information. In other words, what he's actually doing is he is demonstrating that the administration is keenly aware, very aptly aware of the circumstance, what has been creating this. All of this is remarkable. All of this is, I'm telling you, So this is what they've been allowing. They've been allowing the purchase of Iranian petroleum. They've been transporting Iranian petroleum. I have the list written down here. The list is extensive. They've been moving Iranian finances through exchange houses. By the way, I could spend an hour talking about how exchange houses work. The reason why I have a deeper understanding of how exchange houses work is because for a period of time, I was actually working on servers. They were a client of mine. This was many, many, many years ago that actually deal with exchange houses. This one specifically related to PayPal before it was kind of PayPal. And it's a sophisticated mechanism, very sophisticated. So they're moving Iranian finances through exchange houses, using free trade zones. This is a big one, right? To basically smuggle in things that legitimately should not be taken in. They're accepting Iranian aircraft. So if Iran leaves their airspace and somehow manages to creep through an area that's not being guarded or monitored, they're accepting Iranian aircraft. They're maintaining registrations. That's a big deal. They're allowing ship-to-ship fuel transfers. So Iran takes a ship to their limit. There's another foreign ship that's there that's empty. They secretly meet in a location not being monitored. They transfer oil to that ship, and then that ship gets escorted out by the United States. This is Besant saying, we know you're doing that. They're allowing overland transit. Hey, can we take a shortcut through your land instead of having to deal with the Strait of Hormuz and the United States military? And, of course, they're allowing Iran to use their banks. It's a very broad list. Then, at that point, after he lays out everything that's going on, we get this big announcement. And this is where it is major. He said that President Trump is personally, yes, folks, personally contacting world leaders with specific requests to stop interactions with the Iranian regime. In other words, he's going to have this piece of paper in front of him. This is it's a service contract. But he's going to have a piece of paper in front of him. And that piece of paper is going to have a list of all the leaders and the issues that they have, and he's going to put them on notice. That is unbelievable. Can you imagine being another country and having the president of the United States actually giving you a call, especially when the president is President Trump? Imagine what that ends up looking like. One thing Trump is very, 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 very good at doing is keeping his word. He's also pretty good at the poker table. That's the difference here. Look, this isn't merely we found sanctions violations. It's beginning to sound a whole lot more like we know which countries are facilitating this. We have the intelligence on this. We know what they're facilitating. We're telling them what needs to stop, and we're giving them a clock. In other words, we're not just saying, hey, yeah, when you get around to it, you can get around to it. There's a hugely different geopolitical posture here. And by the way, it's highly risky. Isn't it interesting? Matter of fact, I'm going to look this up right now because I wonder if my hunch is correct. I really do. I wonder. I'm going to take a look at this really quickly. You'll understand why I'm doing this. Okay. The markets are down slightly. Crude oil is only up to 86. So the market is not posturing itself. Let me just make myself clear. The market is not posturing itself in a way where it says it's concerned about this coming down. I think the market is recognizing this economic D-Day, as they call it, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, as being the potential for the kind of relief necessary in order to remove any ambiguity that's been taken away from its confidence. The United States economy may actually gain benefit as a result of this. Interesting. I'm telling you guys need to pray for me because there are so many rabbit trails that I want to chase down. And the problem is we got too many super, super smart people in the chat, like intelligent people. And you guys are like making me want to address every little thing that you guys are putting in the chat. And I'm going to chase every kind of rabbit trail and not get through it. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to get through this. And then when I'm done, I'm going to take some questions. Okay? I'll start with the super chats, and then I'll take on the regular questions because there's a lot here. And when I say there's a lot here, folks, there's a lot here. I mean, a lot. Now let's talk about what I believe was Bessent's most revealing statement. And it's and quite honestly, it's one that I think the administration takes very seriously because of what happened on that day. Okay? Think about that. They're referring to it as economic D-Day. A reporter challenged Bessent. This is where I'm going with this, getting my thoughts together. If you watch the conference, the presser, it was very telling. He said something to the effect of, and I should probably have queued it up to play it for you guys. But he basically said, the reporter said, if this is, quote, economic D-Day, unquote, then why not impose everything immediately? And his response, by the way, was there was no pause. The response was extraordinary. Okay? Think about this. He said this. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? Let me say that again. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system? Then he actually explained that Treasury wanted to give countries and entities a short period of time to correct their behavior before enforcement was actually escalated. Think about what he just admitted. There's so many things I want to say about that statement. Think about what he just admitted. He's effectively saying we have a weapon that is powerful enough that careless use of it could create serious global financial disruption. By the way, can I just tell you this? I'm not kidding you when I say this. I watched the market turn when that very statement was made. For the better. I'm not kidding you. The moment he made that statement, I immediately said, I have to see what the market's doing right now because I'm willing to bet you it's turning. By the way, let me just make myself clear. It doesn't mean that Treasury can literally destroy the world's banking system. That is not what I'm saying. Don't run home to mama and tell mama James said the Treasury can destroy the banking system, but they can make a profound difference in it. But I want you to understand that the wording that Bessent used here, and he's not a person who does things on the fly. He doesn't fly off the handle and make crazy statements. The wording that he uses here tells you how seriously everybody in Washington, I'm talking about the Trump administration, understands how seriously they understand the collateral consequences of aggressively sanctioning major foreign financial institutions. If you're like me, your first immediate thought is China. Okay? We go to China. Now, this is probably, in my opinion, the biggest question that sits in this discussion that we've been having. Because if Washington really intends to isolate Iran economically, you can't avoid China. You absolutely have to deal with China. China has been Iran's most dominant oil customer. There's no denying that. If you look at the EIA data that estimates what these numbers look like between China and Iran, they actually estimated Iranian crude, all of those exports, as well as the condensate stuff, all the material, condensate stuff. That really sounded smart. That sounded right. They took all of that material and they said all of those exports to China is approximately, ready for this? These are crazy numbers. In 2020, it was 311,000 barrels a day to China. 2020, 311,000 barrels a day to China. That's crazy, isn't it? Well, get ready. Hold on to the seat of your pants. In 2021, let me look this up. I don't want to get this wrong. In 2021, it was 706,000 barrels of oil a day. 706,000 barrels of oil from 2020 to 2021. From 2021 to 2022, ready? 834,000 barrels of oil in 2022. 834,000 barrels of oil. This is where it gets really crazy. In 2023, that went to 1.189 million barrels of oil every day. 1.19 million barrels of oil. 2024, are you ready for this one? Hold on, everybody. Brace yourself. 1.444 million barrels of oil a day. This is from the U.S. Energy. These are U.S. Energy stats. Meanwhile, if you think about this, exports to destinations outside China in 2024, you ready for this? Were estimated to be millions of barrels? No, you would think it'd be millions more. To China, 1.444 million barrels of oil in 2024. For everybody else, every other customer, ready how many barrels? 40,000 total. 40,000 barrels total. That means China is Iran's number one customer. It tells you everything you need to know. If you want to economically isolate Iran, China will never be a side issue. It can't be an issue. China is the issue. They are the issue. Before the current war, there are estimates that cited, I want to, I don't want to get it wrong. Let me look it up. Hold on one second. Let me put this up. Hold on. Yeah. 80%. China's purchases from Iran, they are responsible for 80% of all of Iran's everything. Their oil, all the petroleum type related things, 80%. Let me make sure. That's not an old number. Yep, that's the current number. Okay? Now here's what's crazy. China's already responded. Beijing actually says that sanctions and pressure, notice this, are not the solution and has gone so far as to warn against actions that could increase instability in the global financial system. No, I don't know how to take that. Honestly, I don't know how to take that. I don't know if that's China saying, hey, listen, let's talk. Come on, don't do this. Please don't do this. This is a terrible idea. Please don't do this. Maybe. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I actually think it's very possible that China may not back down. Now, this is not me being pessimistic by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a real issue. I think this thing is serious. I think it's more serious than most people can even begin to imagine. Okay? This is way more than oil when it comes to China. China officially describes Iran as a comprehensive strategic partner. China also very publicly opposes unilateral sanctions against Iran. They've even, on repeated occasions, multiple times, they have framed sanctions like this as examples of what they call American hegemonic behavior. Strong words, by the way. So there's two very compelling calculations that Beijing is facing right now. The first option is, well, you got to reduce Iranian commerce enough to protect Chinese institutions from American sanctions. And that's going to have to be a pretty significant reduction. The second option that they have is refuse to submit to American financial coercion. They can simply say, we don't trust you, we're not going to believe you, we're going to do whatever we're going to do. And then what they'll do is they'll start building original ways or additional ways. I'd probably say more additional than original because we probably know what they would do. But they're going to build additional ways to create workarounds. They're probably already doing it. Now, I think there's a possibility here. I think there's something we need to watch. Because there is a high likelihood that this could happen. This is the third option that nobody's talking about, but I think it could happen. I think the more likely scenario is that China might try to split the difference. I think that large Chinese banks with enormous exposure to finance in the West are going to be forced to comply. And I think the CCP will let them. But smaller regional institutions, very specifically, the type of banks that are specialty banks, maybe commodity traders or things that are linked to China and not so much with U.S. markets, they may continue to do Iranian business. And the CCP might encourage them to take that route. Now, I think that if you think about this, that's exactly what happened with the bank that got sanctioned by China back in 2010. Matter of fact, I'm going to look up that bank real quick because I don't remember the name and it's just killing me. Hold on one second. I'm sorry, it's just killing me. Kunlun. I'm mispronouncing it, but it's Kunlun. Sorry. There are certain things I just don't remember. So I don't want you to assume that China's response has to be binary. I don't think it's going to be very binary, quite frankly. Now, this is an interesting thought process, and this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. This could potentially accelerate what I would call de-dollarization attempts. Or, organizations like BRICS, it's like this could be the case. But I just want to nuance this for a second, okay? Because there are people, especially people in my world, that I don't want you to pay any attention to, quite frankly, who will tell you that the dollar is about to disappear. Okay, that's not what I'm saying here. Okay, the dollar remains very deeply embedded in global finance. That's why I think the dollar has to strengthen if we're going to see it go away. I don't have the time to explain that. Okay? But ironically speaking, the whole sanctions regime, as you would call it, it demonstrates exactly why. Okay? If general access to American financial institutions didn't matter, well, then these secondary sanctions that we've been talking about, they wouldn't frighten anybody. Nobody'd be all freaked out, but everybody's freaked out over it. Foreign countries are freaked out over it. I actually think that the paradoxical part of this is that the power of this policy actually demonstrates the strength of the U.S. dollar, not the potential weakness. But every single time, and I want you to follow me on this statement, every single time the United States weaponizes that strength, which they oftentimes do, seems as though they've been doing it a lot more lately, adversarial countries will receive another incentive to build alternatives. We watch this happen. This is part of human nature. When YouTube was kicking us out of every single time we mentioned something that they didn't agree with, we went to alternatives. And some of those alternatives are still doing quite well. It's part of human nature. I mean, look at China, look at Russia, look at Iran. They've already spent years experimenting with a local currency settlement mechanism, so that these clearinghouses don't ever get looked at. They're looking at alternative messaging systems. We know that, involving all kinds of AI-based encryption, very dynamic encryption. They're looking at commodity swaps with one another. That would be huge. They're looking at how they handle the issue of gold, cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is a big discussion right now amongst those nations. They're actually even looking for what I would call non-Western financial intermediaries. What do I mean when I say that? Meaning looking for partners that help to amplify the general direction they're moving in that do not involve the incentivization of the currency represented by the United States of America. Look at what BRICS is doing. Same thing. Look, I think that Treasury's decision to specifically designate digital assets and gold as being something that's sanctionable, especially in Iranian sectors, also tells us something else. And that's the fact that Washington understands where Iran has been trying to escape. There'd be no reason why they would mention gold, or especially within the context of a fiat currency, and there'd be no reason why you would expect them to talk about digital assets. But they're doing it because they know what Iran is doing. They're very sharp. America is using the dollar because the dollar is powerful. Make no mistake about it. Iran's partners are searching for alternatives because America is using the dollar. I think both things can be true at the same time, and a lot of people have a hard time reconciling that. The other problem that we have on our hands is what may arise from Turkey. We have to watch Turkey. Turkey is very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. It may become, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating countries in this arena to watch. Why? Okay, let's talk about what we know and why it all matters. Turkey's a NATO member. It's not just a NATO member, it's the second largest military in NATO. Second only to the United States. They are deeply, contrary to popular belief, they are deeply tied to the West economically. If you listen to Erdogan for even 5 minutes, you will recognize that Erdogan has deep, deep, very deep ambitions. Extraordinarily deep ambitions. The kind of ambitions that can't just be ignored. We're talking Ottoman Empire, all kinds of other things. That's big, you guys. They are increasingly independent when it comes to foreign policy. They are. They are beginning to remove themselves in a way where they're becoming the directors more than them becoming the leaders. And by the way, here's something that a lot of people don't think about, but we should. We should think about this. Turkey is a massive energy customer of both Russia and Iran. Don't get me talking about the complication that exists with Cyprus and with Greece, and believe it or not, with Armenia and Azerbaijan. There's a lot of things to talk about there. We just don't have the time to talk about in the context of Turkey. But think about this. In 2026 alone, Turkey imports, the numbers for Turkey imports are in my opinion, they're just staggering. They're staggering. Okay? Let me give you some of these. I have them up here. Okay. $1.01 billion. Sorry, not dollars. Let me make sure I got that right. No, I was wrong. Okay. 1.01 billion cubic meters of pipeline gas from Azerbaijan. Think about this. That's Azerbaijan. 883 million cubic meters of gas from Iran. Funny too, because Azerbaijan is very close with Israel. This is interesting. There are so many things to say about the Azerbaijan relationship with Turkey, and I just mentioned it briefly because I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I'm gonna hold fast to that discipline. Here's the other one from Russia. 882 882 million cubic meters from Russia of gas. Okay. This is critical. Okay? Very, very important. Because what that means, if you really think about it, is it means that Iran was essentially tied with Russia as one of Turkey's largest pipeline gas providers in that single month. This is June of 2026. By the way, those numbers are not the year 2026. Those numbers are June of 2026. Now, why does this matter? Why does it mean anything? Okay, I want you to connect what I'm connecting. Washington can very easily tell Turkey, easily reduce Iranian economic interaction. Turkey can respond. And they could say something like, you're asking us to restructure part of our energy supply. I mean, it would be that big. There'd be a whole new conflict in that. That doesn't mean Turkey can't do it. Look, I think Turkey can do anything they put their mind to. It just means that if they comply, there's going to be a real cost, and that may end up costing the United States of America. Turkey also has a very strategic problem, and that problem is huge because Turkey and Iran are not natural allies on everything, right? They compete in some areas. Okay, they disagree over Syria. They disagree over the issue with the Kurds. They disagree over who will have regional influence in that arena. They disagree with sectarian dynamics, big sectarian dynamics. I mean, from the north to the south, they have major disagreements. And then if you start thinking about the influence of Caucasus, I'm telling you, there's big international pressure here that can produce all kinds of weird relationships if not fully examined. And this is a very, very slippery slope. Washington makes Iran increasingly dependent upon countries outside the Western economic architecture. That's the whole potentially prophetic aspect of all of this. I'm not saying that means that Turkey immediately becomes Iran's ally tomorrow, but it means that Iran has fewer alternatives. And it means that the likelihood of those fewer alternatives, the result that would bring are significantly larger. The fewer alternatives that exist will increase the strategic value of whoever they choose to use, whoever remains. Now, who's the most vulnerable country in this? A lot of people say, oh, it's going to be Iran. They're the most vulnerable country. That's not true. The most vulnerable country in this, and this is in my opinion, based on the analysis that I'm doing, is Iraq. Iraq is another completely different case. Iraq has enormous exposure to both Washington and, yes, Tehran as well. For years, Iraq relied heavily upon Iranian energy. The IMF actually estimated that Iran historically provided enough gas imports to supply roughly 30 to 40% of Iraq's electricity needs. That is a massive number. That means economic separation from Iran isn't some abstract foreign policy decision that Baghdad is going to have to make. It can literally mean them asking questions like, oh man, if we do this, are we going to have enough electricity? Okay? They're already trying to diversify. They are, because they see the problem. But that is going to take infrastructure. It's going to take gas production of your own. It's going to take having pipelines. It's going to take generating capacity. And all of that stuff takes time. They're trying to do it at Al-Fah. I can tell you that right now. But it's too little. And it's not happening fast enough. So what in the world does Iraq do when Washington, says cut Iran off? What approach do they take? Think about this. That's a hard decision because portions of Iraq's electrical system still depends on Iranian natural gas. What's the alternative to that? What kind of pressure operation is this going to end up becoming? I mean, it's interesting because it's going to create a conundrum for them. The UAE is also another very powerful pressure point. Why? Why is that the case? Well, the UAE has historically been an enormous commercial gateway for Iran. That's beginning to die off pretty substantially because of what Iran has been doing to the UAE. But all of that is also as critical as what happens with the Gulf states. The Gulf states have a different calculation mechanism that they have to create. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have very little incentive to strengthen Iran. They don't want to strengthen Iran. They've spent years viewing Iran as a strategic threat. But they also don't want another enormous regional war. They're trying to prevent that from happening. They don't want Hormuz indefinitely destabilized. Nobody wants Hormuz indefinitely destabilized. They don't want their oil infrastructure under threat. OPEC already saw that by the removal of the UAE when they chose to walk away. But the UAE was attempting to stabilize the infrastructure by doing that. Iranian retaliation on their territory could be one of the conduits. Conduit's not the word I'm looking for. Catalysts. Thank you. Sorry, my brain's not working. Maybe one of the catalysts to create that condition. Look, the other thing that they don't want, and this is where the largest possibility exists, is they don't want global energy markets to go into complete chaos. So the Gulf states potentially are going to favor pressure on Iran while at the same time, as crazy as this sounds, fearing what excessive pressure might cause Iran to do. That's the distinction that's really concerning. Now, Iran's response, as we expected, is already aggressive. They've been responding very aggressively. Iranian officials are warning the countries supporting these sanctions could be treated as partners in the war. One actual Iranian official, matter of fact, I saw this on 2C TV. It was interesting, very aggressively. He announced that support for the new sanctions could amount to another act of war. So he's saying, in the eyes of the IRGC, you're declaring war on us if you participate in the sanctions. So that's going to raise a very serious question. If a Gulf state, anybody in the GCC, aggressively enforces America's sanction demands, which, by the way, would be hugely disruptive to Iran, does Iran retaliate economically? How does it work? They don't really have much leverage economically to retaliate, so will it be militarily speaking? Will it be through their proxies? How's it going to work? Are they going to try to block shipping? What about cyber operations? We just don't know. There's a lot in the air. We don't know what that's going to be. But that's exactly why this announcement that Bessent made really matters. Okay, and by the way, for those of you that don't think this is the case, it is the case. The Strait of Hormuz is directly tied into this. Okay, it's not occurring in a vacuum. The administration views the global economy itself as part of this war. Okay, it's very, very important. Bessent has previously said that roughly 20% of the world's energy supply normally passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That is a statistic that is still stipulated to. Iran's ability to threaten or disrupt that route gives Tehran huge leverage, global leverage, even though it's diminishing. But it's still there. The American response increasingly appears to be, well, if Iran can weaponize geography, America can weaponize economics. That's the way they're responding. And by the way, that may be a wise response. I think it's a very important way to understand this. Let me put it this way. Iran controls one of the most important physical checkpoints in the global economy. It's true. Now, they're trying to make that irrelevant right now. The GCC is trying to make that irrelevant. But Iran controls that. But America controls much of the financial architecture through which the global economy moves. So if the financial architecture is broken, that strait isn't going to matter. Now, those two forms of leverage that exist, the one with Tehran and the one with Washington, they're both colliding. And by the way, this gets even more significant because in case you haven't noticed, which most of you probably already have, this isn't just economic warfare. It's economic warfare that's running alongside military warfare. Oftentimes, they're not put together like that. Oftentimes, they're separated. Why? Because if you put them together, you create a condition for yourself that brings in disorder the likes no one has ever seen. By the way, the president too, but Bessent compared this to D-Day. By the way, I think the historical comparison here is a dangerous one to make. Okay? I really do think it's dangerous. Economic sanctions are obviously not Normandy. But I think his reason for using the analogy matters. I think that specifically he emphasized attacking the enemy's positions, including in third countries. That's exactly what the campaign is designed to do. Iran has spent years building economic networks outside Iran with their shell companies, their tankers, even through their proxies, shipping registries, exchange houses like we talked about before. Gold networks, crypto networks. Let me think. Foreign banks, brokers, of course, of all kinds. Even companies putting up front companies. America's strategy has now changed. It's increased. Now the strategy is don't just block it on. Hunt the network wherever it exists and destroy it. Now, let's talk about the 5 sectors. Okay, I want to talk about them for just a second because I think that they're important. Okay, we talked about who the 5 sectors or what the 5 sectors are. Okay, digital assets. I don't really need to talk much about digital assets. You guys know the basics of it. Iran needs ways to move value without traditional banks. Cryptocurrency is the only way that they could viably do that. Treasury is targeting it. Okay? If banks close, all you do is add value to digital currency. But if you start attacking digital currency, then the banks closing maintain the effect that they were designed to have. I think gold is another picture here that's very important. I know why they're attacking it. Because gold becomes valuable when currency collapses, when banks become inaccessible, when inflation surges, when international settlements become difficult. By the way, there's a reason why we called the US dollar a fiat currency, because during the Nixon administration, the tie that we have to money and gold was removed. The value of the dollar was based on what you could promise in terms of gold. Treasury tells us that Iran has increasingly turned to gold as a way to stabilize value and sort of hedge against the inflationary problem that they're having. So the point here is that if they can't trust the rial because it's falling apart and can't access dollars, gold is going to be their money. And Washington wants to take it away. I don't have to get into shipping. If you don't have shipping, you can't monetize anything. If oil can exist underground forever, then that's great. But the problem is if it's being drilled, you can't abandon the well. If you do, then the well is going to become useless. You can have all the oil in the world, but it does nothing if you can't move it. Aviation is the same thing. It's the same picture. Aviation speaks to weapons and transport and all that kind of stuff. Technology is the same thing. Iran needs, they're looking for the most advanced components that they can find so they can build their missiles and their drones and their communication and develop their cyber abilities and all of their industrial systems, all their manufacturing systems, their military industrial complex, all of that. So what happens with Iran if the doors close? If for whatever reason none of that can happen, you would think that economic isolation would be the thing that would just completely shut the country down. But economic isolation does not always produce geopolitical isolation. It just doesn't. Sometimes it actually will produce the opposite. And that's where I'm going here with the prophetic implication. Think about this. Work through this with me. If Iran loses access to Western markets, Western banks, all the intermediaries that are in the Gulf, if they lose access to neutral shipping, or they lose access to all of the international aviation support, if they lose access to all these conventional payment systems, then Tehran will now have fewer choices. There's very little they can do, and the remaining relationships become dramatically more important. So who's left? What does that mean? You got China. China buys Iranian energy. It opposes unilateral sanctions. We just talked about that. It calls Iran a comprehensive strategic partner. And they explicitly talk about increasing cooperation with Tehran. They do it all day, every day. Russia's the same way. Russia shares Iran's interest in weakening Western financial dominance. That's what Russia likes Iran for that reason. Both countries benefit from mechanisms designed to circumvent any type of Western economic pressure. That's real. Then you got Turkey. Turkey sits between both systems. They're a NATO member. They have commercial ties to Europe. Their energy does tie eastward. They have regional ambitions. It's complicated, but it's potentially increasingly valuable for Iran to develop a relationship with them. So that's the geopolitical question that we have in front of us. Does Operation Economic Outcast isolate Iran from everybody, or does it isolate Iran from one economic bloc and force it deeper into another? I think it's the second. I think it forces it deeper into another. They're not the same thing. And this is where Bible prophecy comes into play. Ezekiel 38 names a bunch of countries. Persia, Magog, which is a whole region. There's 4 other names given to us. Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, Togarmah. Those are Turkey. You've got Cush and Put. You've got Libya. You've got Sudan. You've got some of these other places. Ethiopia. And this is where geopolitical movement has to get our attention. The Bible tells us what the eventual alignment is going to look like against Israel. It doesn't necessarily tell us every political and economic mechanism that creates that alignment. So when Iran becomes increasingly isolated from the Western financial system and increasingly dependent upon Eastern and Northern powers, I'm going to pay attention. Not because I'm claiming fulfillment today. That's ridiculous. We're not in Ezekiel 38. But because I already know that the direction, the destination, the Bible says these relationships ultimately will go. Now here's the irony of it. Okay? This is the part that I just really believe. It's just pure irony. America's objective is to do a bunch of things. Make Iran stand alone. But if Iran cannot stand alone, what does Iran do? Think about it. If they don't stand alone, what do? They're looking for patrons. They're looking for buyers. They're looking for military partners. They're looking for a diplomatic cover. They're looking for a daddy. They're looking for countries that will ignore Washington. The harder you make it for Iran to participate in the American global order, let's just put it that way, the more valuable America's geopolitical rivals become to Iran. Let me say that one more time. The harder you make it for Iran to participate in anything American, the more valuable America's geopolitical rivals will become to Iran. I'm not saying that means that Washington shouldn't apply sanctions. They absolutely should, because it's the right thing to do. It simply means foreign policy creates secondary effects, and those effects matter. By the way, I think I would be amiss to tell you that the trilateral security agreement matters as well. The one with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. Sorry, I have to say it that way. We know what happened earlier this month. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, they signed a new defense agreement under which an attack on one is treated as an attack on all. Now, it's been tested, and they haven't come through with protecting one another, but it's still significant. At the same time, Pakistan is actively trying to mediate between Washington and Tehran. Think about that. Pakistan's army chief has been involved in efforts to revive talks with Iran. Now, why is that interesting? Because the Middle East isn't simply dividing into Iran versus everybody else. What's happening is we're seeing overlapping relationships that are forming. Turkey's working with Saudi Arabia. Pakistan's working with Saudi Arabia. But now Pakistan is talking to Iran. Turkey's trading with Iran. China supports Iran diplomatically. Gulf states oppose Iranian expansion, but they're scared about fearful or terrible regional escalation. This is no longer a simple two-sided chessboard, you guys. It is multiple alliances moving at the same time. It is a massive 4D chess game. Now, What could go right for Washington? We should just be objective about this. Well, the policy could work. There's a significant amount of historical evidence that secondary sanctions actually change people's behavior. Foreign companies may simply decide Iran's not worth it. Okay. Banks could determine that that the possession of Iranian accounts is too detrimental for their standing, and they could terminate those accounts. Shipping companies could basically say, we're no longer going to do business with Iran or anywhere near the region. We'd rather be in a place where we're secure. Ports could definitely deny services. Insurers will say, we're not going to cover you if you do business with Iran. Governments could very much increase enforcement. Foreign exchanges could stop processing any type of Iranian transactions. And most traders could walk away. But the result of that is that Iran's remaining international commerce will become more expensive. It will be slower. It'll be riskier. It's definitely going to be harder to insure. It certainly is going to be harder to finance. And it's going to be easier for Treasury to identify. That may be the one that they're looking for the most. Easier for Treasury to identify. Now, what could go wrong? There's several possibilities. There's a lot of possibilities here. Let's talk about them for a minute because this is what I thought about. I put a lot of thought about this. Okay? China. That could go wrong. China could refuse. Then Washington has to decide whether its threat is real. If they let China go, their threat isn't real. And so objectively, the United States ends up looking weaker. That could be a huge problem. If they actually go through with sanctioning Chinese banks, it could also be a huge problem. What if countries create more workarounds? That's the other problem that could happen, right? Sanctions will absolutely produce adaptation. You could have new shell companies, new currencies, new shipping methods, new banks, new trade corridors. Or Iran could also escalate. And if they escalate, the obvious could happen. We'll see cyber attacks and proxy actions and regional retaliation. And it'll just get ugly. The other thing is that civilians, those who are not fighting, they will absorb enormous pain, very similar to what the tariffs did in its initial stage. Another bad thing that could happen is that allies could resist American power. And that has happened before. If that happens, it could be hugely detrimental to our standing. Guys, the big test is not going to be the announcement, okay? Don't get me wrong. The announcement was critical. But what's really important here is that we don't know whether Operation Economic Outcast becomes historically transformative. Why don't we know it? Because threatening sanctions is different from sanctioning institutions that really matter. China and Turkey and Iraq and the UAE were conspicuously important to this conversation, but Bessent is initially giving governments and entities a chance to change their behavior. I think that's the fear that they all have. So what do you watch? Will Washington actually execute enforcement on these? It's a very, very question. It's a very, very good question. Here are the 5 things that I would watch next. Okay? Write this down if you're taking notes, because it's important. I would watch China. Hands down. Is their oil trade going to decline, or is it going to remain the same? Are they going to double down? Are major Chinese banks beginning to distract themselves? Are they going to allow themselves to focus on the things that are secondary in hopes that it might just go away? Or are they actually going to choose to separate themselves? Is Beijing going to retaliate? If they do, that's going to create some problems. What about Turkey? Ankara may seek some kind of exemption. I think that's the route that Erdogan might go. He might go to the United States and say, hey, give me an exemption here, which would create even a bigger problem. Is Turkey going to assist in it? Are they going to, there's so much to say. I would also be watching Iraq. I would be watching the UAE. And I would be watching what the enforcement mechanism looks like. I would want to see who the first major foreign institution punished under this expanded this expansion is. I would be very, very curious to know. That name may tell us whether or not the president is truly willing to follow through on what he's going to do. I would also watch the deadlines. We're going to start seeing some deadlines coming out. I would watch the deadlines, put them on the calendar, and see if things have changed. I think there's a big picture summary that we have to think about here. It's very, very important. We know what happened here. Iran has spent decades learning how to survive American sanctions. It created shadow banks, shadow fleets. Venezuela helped to solve some of that problem. Front companies and middlemen and alternate payment systems and gold and crypto and all the other things that we've talked about. Washington is simply not going to allow that to happen anymore. So how is it going to resolve itself? I think that's so important. The one thing I will say is no matter how you cut it, the Bible told us we would get here. We are watching nations beginning to gather against Jerusalem. It shouldn't be a surprise to us. Okay, that was a lot. I know. I went for an hour and a half to explain a very complicated thing. I hope this was useful to you guys. I know this is a smaller audience than normal because this is like deep geopolitical stuff. Like I totally get that. But I thought that it would be good to talk about it because I want you guys to be very well equipped. So with that, let me look at some super chats. And let me see here. Okay, here we go. I'll read some of these super chats and then we'll take a few questions and then we'll wrap it up. Okay? So let's do that really quickly. Oh my goodness. All of them are Brad. That's hilarious. Brad, are you going to get me in trouble? Oh, let me read these. Oh my goodness. The elephant comment is funny, Brad. Thank you. You know I'm not going to read it. That's funny. I'll read it. After Nixon won the Democrat nomination for Senate in Florida, the Dems' chances dropped from 15% to 5% of winning, dropping faster than the Iranian currency. That's hilarious. Saturday, President Trump did a lap around D.C. in the Beast prior to the race. Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell did. Oh, man, I can't do. You're going to get me in trouble. Please make sure all the dates in your rapture is next month. Have all yours changed from 2025 to 2026. Extra points for star chats and bad. You know, it's interesting. I should probably. I'll point this out because Brad mentioned it. My goodness, man, all the lies coming out with people trying to say that the rapture is coming up within the next month. What a bunch of nonsense. What a bunch of nonsense. Okay. Here's a question. I'll take that. Cinco, I think it's L3R. Turkey is a member of NATO. Drag NATO countries into the Ezekiel 38. I don't know. Really, truly don't know. We know the country's named. So that would, I just don't really know. Okay, I think that's all we have for questions. I don't see anything else. Guys, I love you. God bless you. It's always fun to do these alone. I miss David. I always like being with David. But these are fun, and Lord willing, you guys got a decent education as I know what's happening. I'm releasing a video on this that's a little bit more targeted and it got a little bit more organized instead of me chasing down rabbit trails. I think you'll also enjoy that as well. Okay? Love you guys. God bless you. Keep fighting the good fight.